Many experts, journalists, and even politicians have been saying for years that the middle class in Western countries is in grave danger. You see, Visualeconomik viewers, pay attention very close to the following news stories.
The middle class faces its greatest threat since the 1930s. Shrinking middle class threatens global economic growth.
According to a number of experts and journalists, in the near future, middle-income earners, that is, people who are neither very rich nor very poor, lifelong workers, will be condemned to poverty. These theories suggest that inequality will increase enormously in our nations, and the most of us will become poorer and poorer, while at the same time, only a small group of privileged people will manage to accumulate wealth. But what are the reasons behind the supposed increase in inequality, and why, according to these theories, might the middle class be more at risk than ever? Well, on this topic, there are explanations of all kinds and for all tastes. The blame is often placed on elements such as private indebtedness arising from financial bubbles such as the 2008 financial crisis, the increasingly high cost of housing, the public deficit, and the huge taxes which many countries burden their workers with and which some companies do not pay. However, here on Visualeconomik, we think that these explanations fall far short or even simply cannot explain the sudden increase in inequality. Now, does that mean that the middle class is not in any danger and that these news stories are unsubstantiated hoaxes? Not at all. The truth is that there is reason for concern about the middle classes. A reason that has nothing to do with ones previously mentioned, and that, incidentally, is not only a danger for the future, it is a reason that has already been causing inequality to increase more and more for several decades. That is, we are not talking about any hypothesis or theory, we are talking about something that is already happening today and that could get worse in the coming years. Do you want to know what we are talking about? Of course you do. Well, the key lies in three concepts: artificial intelligence, roboticization, and technological advancement. As many of you already know, technology has allowed us to live better and better for hundreds of years, and today we have medicines, cars, and even the internet thanks precisely to technological progress. However, not everyone believes that technology will always play in our favor. The Luddites of the 19th century, for example, were a group of people who thought that machines and technology were going to replace their jobs and condemn us all to unemployment. That is why, for several years, they dedicated themselves to destroying all kinds of machinery in factories around Europe. In any case, the Luddites did not prosper, and furthermore, their theory that technology was going to put us all out of jobs was proven to be completely false, though the Luddites did lose their jobs. As you can see in this graph, despite the enormous technological process that has taken place in developed countries over the last 200 years, employment rates have remained constant throughout history. In other words, technology has never destroyed jobs in general terms. In any case, technological evolution did destroy some jobs, like those of the Luddites, but contributed to the creation of new ones. Without looking any further, YouTubers didn't exist 20 years ago, and without the invention of the internet or digital cameras, we could never have existed. However, does this mean that technological evolution should not worry us at all? Does it mean that its effects are completely harmless and do not damage anyone? Well, here it gets a little more interesting. Check this out. As technological evolution has progressed over the past few decades, we have seen inequality skyrocket in advanced countries such as the United States. This is a country in which, brace yourselves for this, the richest 1% of the population today earns more than double what it did in the 1980s. More specifically, the richest 1% of the population now receives more than 20% of all wealth generated. It is true that the increase in inequality could have to do with many factors beyond technological evolution, but the reality is that there are many indicators that this could be the main culprit. For example, this graph that you're seeing now shows the number of workers needed by SP 500 companies to make $1 million. As you can see, companies needed fewer and fewer employees to generate more and more money. And note that this does not mean that companies are laying off workers. It simply means that thanks to better machinery and better technology, they can become much bigger and richer without having to pay so many salaries. However, beyond the hypotheses and the somewhat superficial graphs that we have just shown you, what do we know for sure about the dangers of technology on the middle class? Do we have deeper, more scientific evidence that something worrisome is going to happen? And if so, what is the exact process by which new technologies such as artificial intelligence could trigger inequality altogether? Today on Visualeconomik, we're going to tell you all about it. So, let's get cracking. Let me ask you a question. What kind of jobs do you think are most at risk of being replaced by machines or robots? Sure, I'm certain you immediately think of routine jobs that follow very orderly and predictable task schedules. For example, before the existence of computers, a lot of people were needed in offices to alphabetize a magnitude of files and to be able to search for them when necessary. This type of work then, obviously, no longer exists because it has been replaced by computer databases. But if you want, I'll give you another example. Think of the letter carriers. In the past, it took a lot of letter carriers to send letters in piles, but with the existence of electronic mail, you can send messages from one place to another without the need of mail carriers. Well, since the 1980s, most economists thought that these types of workers who performed routine tasks that did not require much training or improvisation were precisely those who would suffer the most from the effects of technology. What's interesting, though, is that at the same time, people with some education, people with college degrees, and who had jobs that required some training were benefiting enormously from the same technology. Let's take the case of email again. Many letter carriers became unemployed, yes, but thanks to email, lawyers, journalists, and doctors were able to take advantage of this technology to make their work easier and increase their profits. You could say that until a few years ago, technological evolution was detrimental to low-skilled workers, but in return, it favored skilled workers from the middle and upper classes. However, as you can imagine, it seems that all of this is beginning to change.
The AI doctor will see you now. ChatGPT passes gold standard US medical exam as researchers hail moment as milestone for artificial intelligence.
As you can see, artificial intelligence could sooner or later replace the work of doctors, lawyers, or even teachers. In that sense, the new technology would no longer only harm less educated workers, but could also begin to punish more educated workers as well, the workers who largely made up the middle classes. In fact, this is not something that is going to happen in the future or is just floating as a theory, but is something that has actually been happening for a few years now. Check this out.
The number of clerical employees and subordinates in banks has gone down drastically. In 2005, clerks and subordinates constituted more than 63% of banking employees in scheduled commercial banks. That number fell to nearly 30% in 2021.
Thanks to advances in computing, our computers can perform increasingly complex tasks. It is no longer just routine jobs that are replaceable, but also increasingly complicated and demanding jobs. This means that some skilled workers are beginning to lose their jobs or see their salaries reduced as they are no longer needed as much as they used to be. And now, let me ask you another question. If there are a lot of middle class and educated people who are losing their jobs, where do you think that they're going to end up? Well, the answer is that some people will study more, become more specialized, and become much more productive, moving from the middle classes to the upper classes. But that will not be many. Other people will be forced to work in underqualified professions, much lower paid professions that could be performed by uneducated and untrained people. This is something we are seeing more and more in developed countries. While typical middle class jobs are losing many workers, lower and upper class jobs are gaining them. In other words, the population is divided into two large groups: the wealthy group working in highly demanding and skilled jobs, and the poor group working in low-paying jobs that require no training. This concept is known as labor polarization, and it is partly what explains why there are more and more jobs for things like bricklayers, mechanics, or waiters, while jobs are being lost in theoretically more qualified sectors such as banking. And all this, visual economic community, leads us to a very clear conclusion. Inequality is increasing. In fact, the top 1% of the highest paid workers have seen their salaries increase much, much more than the rest of the workers. The point, therefore, is that inequality among workers themselves is increasing. And we are not talking about capitalist class inequality against the working class, though that does still apply. We are talking about inequality among the workers themselves. And keep in mind, this does not mean that we should all aspire to be in the wealthy group. In fact, being part of the rich group would imply having very specific and very advanced training. It would mean dedicating years of work and in-depth study, and above all, dedicating more hours than anyone else to work.
UK's highest paid workers spend longest hours on the job. The 10th of men with the highest hourly pay now work 7 hours a week more on average than the 10th of men on the lowest hourly pay.
In view of this, we must now ask ourselves a question. What role will companies and capitalists play in all this? What will the real life consequences of this increase in inequality be? Well, let's find out. Under the yoke of the capitalist. At the beginning of this video, we saw how major US companies needed fewer and fewer workers to generate the same amount of money, and it certainly doesn't seem to be a coincidence. In a study that analysed technological evolution in more than 19 developed countries, it was found that as technology advanced, the share of wages in income declined. In other words, profits increased more than wages. At first glance, this could mean two things. The first thing is that capitalists would be getting richer, increasing inequality between workers and capitalists, and the second is that workers were becoming poorer and having lower wages. Who'd have thought? However, let's not jump to so many hasty conclusions. The point is, think about this, even if the share of wages in profits is getting lower and lower, that doesn't mean that wages are getting lower and lower. It simply means that they are a smaller slice of a bigger pie. What we can hope for, and this is being a little bit optimistic, is that wages will continue to grow as well, that living conditions will improve, but not only for rich, but also for the poor. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but I'm not holding my breath. Let's say that we could possibly live in a more unequal world, but one where we'll all live better. After all, this is precisely what has happened throughout history since the Industrial Revolution. Although technology may have favoured inequality, it has also made it possible to increase production, reduce product prices, create new medicines, reduce the number of hours worked, and in general, improve living conditions. And it is precisely this that leads us to a second, even more important conclusion. Thanks to the fact that we are living better and better, naturally, there are exceptions in some countries, but generally, ordinary citizens have more capacity to save, more capacity to invest, and undertake their own projects. And why is this important, you might ask? Well, it's important for two main reasons. The first is that workers are increasingly able to participate more and more in capital income. In other words, workers in the more technologically advanced countries no longer only earn money through their salaries, but also earn a lot of money through investments such as equities, the stock market, or real estate. To give you an idea, in the US alone, the percentage of salaries workers who also profit from capital income has been growing at dizzying rates since the mid-1980s. This is what is known as homopolutia, and by the way, we explained this phenomenon in more detail in a previous video that you can find linked in the description of this one. The point is that the difference between capitalists and workers is getting smaller and smaller, in that precisely because workers who now earn more money than they did 40 years ago can use their capital to become capitalists. But take note, because there's still more. Thanks to technology, it is also becoming easier for people with fewer resources to set up their own businesses and start their own projects. A very clear case of this is that of the YouTubers. That is, think about all those people who started recording themselves at some point with a cell phone and today have companies dedicated to content creation. Well, I mean, I can think of a few. In short, the point we want to get at with all of this is that it is not at all clear that technological evolution will lead to an increase in inequality between workers and capitalists. It is true that companies will make a lot of money, but those companies will also be owned by many workers and anonymous individuals. The classic figure of the capitalist drinking wine from his armchair at home without lifting a finger seems more a matter of history than something which represents reality, where the ownership of companies is divided among more and more people. In any case, and in view of all this, let's recap. On the one hand, we have said that the middle class is in danger of collapsing because of technology, and that two large social classes of workers will be created, one upper class and one lower class. On the other hand, we have said that even if inequality increases, poverty might not necessarily increase. That is, we will probably all live better, although we will be far more unequal. The fall of the middle classes will not necessarily mean worse living conditions. And finally, we have shown that it seems far from clear that a new capitalist class will gain too much power from technology. If anything, inequality will increase among workers. Although I'm sure the capitalists will also be doing okay. That said, we can now ask ourselves one last question. How can we manage to adapt future generations to the foreseeable greater inequality? How can we ensure that this transition takes place in a way that is not harmful to all, or even is beneficial to all? Here, there is no magic formula, but above all, it is very important to be able to adapt educational models. In other words, the future of work will not require people capable of memorizing or having great mental calculation skills. Machines will be able to do that even better than we can. What the future will need is people capable of dealing with unpredictable problems, of adapting their tasks to new day-to-day needs. The workers of the future must be flexible, able to innovate and take advantage of the enormous benefits that technology will offer us. Let's just say we will all need to adapt our educational models towards an approach where we can better collaborate with machines and be able to better exploit our human capabilities. We could make whole new videos on measures capable of reforming the educational model, not only at the public level, but also at the private and even corporate training level. But today, we would like to end with a quote from one of the most influential thinkers in history. In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. In other words, all that we have shown you are simply statistical interpretations, analyses developed over the last few years with a lot of academic rigor, but at the end of the day, things, as we've all seen, can change overnight. Economists do not have crystal balls with which to predict the future, so take what we have told you with caution and simply as clues as to where the world might be heading in the coming decades. With that said though, it's now over to all of you. Do you know which famous economist said the phrase we just mentioned? What do you think is in store for the middle class in the future? Are you concerned about rising inequality, or does it seem a minor concern as long as living conditions improve? How can we all get a share of the now bigger pie? You can leave me your answer in the comments below. And as always, don't forget that here on Visualeconomik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit a little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it so we know. All the best, and I'll see you next time. YouTubers can't get replaced by machines, right? What?